Hello, my name is Joe Halfman, and I'm a Senior Solution Consultant with fourTENS. This video is part 3 on the Accordion Menu component built for K2 Smartforms. In the previous video, we looked at the overall layout and elements of a single-page web form that features this Accordion Menu. In this video, I'll be showing the details of the implementation of the Accordion Menu, including the CSS and JavaScript. As a refresher from the previous session, we're looking here at that single page web application that we desire. It consists of a fixed header on top with a fixed width left-hand menu, which will contain our accordion menu, with scrollable content filling up the remainder of the page. Now let's take a look at the HTML that makes up the accordion menu. It has a div, which then contains an unordered list for the sections, and then within each section we have a list item that also contains an unordered list for each of the list items. Now let's take a look at each one of these elements a little bit closer. Let's first take a look at the section header. The section header uses an H3 element as well as an anchor tag. The anchor tag is just there so that we can handle our on-click event when we click on the header. This will call some JavaScript, as we'll see later, that handles the expansion and collapse of the menu items, giving it that accordion effect. We also use font awesome icons for each of the different section headers as well. Now let's take a look at the menu item. The menu item is just a list item with an anchor tag within it. One key part of this anchor tag are two attributes, one being data key and the other being the data link. The data key we can use, as we will see in a future session, in something like an application like our Smartforms, to identify actually which item we clicked on. The data link itself is the actual link to the form or to the URL that we want to link to when we click on the menu item. The on-click event is going to call the JavaScript. It's going to handle that navigation for us, as well as setting of the content area. In addition to the accordion menu, which is on that left-hand side with a fixed width, we have a fixed header. And in this implementation, it's a pretty simple header with a div, which we put as a fixed position with a specific height, as well as 100% width. And finally, we have the scrollable content area, which is implemented as an iframe, and we just use some basic CSS so that we again have a fixed position with it and a specific left and top position. They're defined by Css variables, which we will go into detail in the next slide. The CSS variables are used to define the main styles for the accordion menu elements. Using variables makes it easier to make changes to the styles, and the use of these can be leveraged to build an application for managing the customization and configuration of the menu appearance, as well as the sections and the items' content. Now let's take a closer look at the HTML, the CSS, and the JavaScript. Here we see the HTML for our single-page web form design. We have the fixed header defined first up top. Then we have our accordion menu and all of our HTML for that there. And then we have the content area. Now that in itself is not going to do us much. So in order to make it lay out properly, we need to inject quite a bit of CSS. So based on our different classes that we have defined here, we have styles. Each of these styles are defined in our CSS. Once again, here you'll see all of those CSS variables that we're going to use to style the different elements. As we look through the CSS, you'll see I do an import of a specific font that I use for the menu. This is called Nudito. And then within the CSS itself, you'll see quite a few references to those variables for things like the menu background color, title background color, even your font sizes, the font colors, etc. This makes it very easy to tweak and make changes to the menu without having to make changes to your underlying CSS. And then finally, the JavaScript is what's used to do the accordion effect as well as set the content area for our page. In our previous session, we also showed the JavaScript here for calculating our div height and div width, and we want to do that every time our browser resizes. Not only do we resize the content area, but we're also going to resize our menu so that it will scroll, if need be, in a proper way. We see the menu header click function, and what it's doing is it's going to handle that accordion effect when we click on a menu header and we're either going to slide up or slide down the menu items. And we actually do the slide up and the slide down, as you can see here, using standard jQuery function. And then finally, the menu item click. So when we click on a menu item, what it's doing here is it's going to get the attribute from that data link attribute that we defined for our elements, and then it's going to set the source of our content frame to the value in that data link, and that's how we can refresh that content area. And then finally, we do a menu item click to, by default, click on that first menu header, which is going to take us to our home page. Here's the web page that gets rendered using the HTML and CSS that we just took a look at. On the left-hand side, we have our accordion menu. At the top, we have our fixed header, and the rest of the area is taken up by our scrollable content, as we can see here. Also notice that by default, our accordion menu has selected the first section, which takes us to our home page. If I click on one of the other section headers here, such as favorites, the JavaScript will handle calling the slide up and slide down so that we get the accordion effect. Also, when we click on one of the items in the list here, that will also change our content area. The JavaScript behind the scenes is doing that as well. So this concludes the video on the implementation of the HTML, CSS, and the JavaScript used for the accordion menu and the layout of the single page form. Stay tuned for the next video because I'm going to show you how a K2 Smartforms application can be built to manage the customization and configuration of the accordion menu, leveraging the CSS variables that have been defined.